Okay, it looks like we're recording, and I am very excited to have my friend Zoe Rosenberg on the channel. Welcome to the channel, Zoe.
Thanks so much for having me.
And Zoe, what is your actual title at Direct Action Everywhere right now? Because I assume it's changed a bit over the years.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm currently a member of DXC's elected core team. I also DXC social media coordinator, and then when you know, not on an ankle monitor and all that kinds of thing, I'm an undercover investigator and animal rescuer with DXC as well.
Yeah, exactly. So you're basically a giant badass with Direct Action Everywhere. You're a legend, and I feel very thrilled to be able to talk to you. So
Thank
you have just taken part in so many historic actions, rescues, disruptions. I mean, you embody everything about animal rights activism that makes me proud to be a part of it. So thank you for all you've done for the animals over the years. And you've been at it for at least 10 years, because I know you founded Happy Hen Animal Sanctuary when you were 11 years old. I think you're 21 right now, right?
I just turned 22 a couple months ago.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I missed that. Okay, so you're
Okay.
22. So
You don't
11
have to
years
keep track of
now.
my age.
So that's just incredible right there. I mean, so most people when they're 11 years old, they're, just going to school, just doing their thing. They're not really involved in animal rescue. So how did that come about? And why did you get so passionate so fast with animals?
Yeah, well, I always really loved animals and cared about them very deeply as a young child. My mom's a veterinarian, so people are always showing up at our house with animals who they found on the street. She was kind of like the go-to person to anyone who knew her if they found an animal or needed help with an animal. Um, so yeah, I was just surrounded by animals growing up. We had dogs, rabbits, goats, and I started volunteering at a local animal shelter when I was 7 years old, and yeah, always like my dream was to start an animal rescue or do something with animals. And when I was 9 years old, my family got chickens, and that's when things really started to change for me. And yeah, I mean, I grew up with this perception, like I think a lot of people have, that chickens are stupid, that they're not like dogs and cats, that dogs and cats are special. Um, and when we got these chickens, that completely shattered my perception of them. I realized that they were just like the dogs and cats that I loved and that I had been wanting to rescue for so many years. Um, so yeah, when I was, I guess, 10 or 11, I guess I would have been 11. I stumbled upon a video on the NSW Hen Rescue website. That's a rescue in Australia that rescues hens from factory egg farms. And I saw a video on their website of them going in and removing hens from cages. And they were doing open rescue before DXC was even around, before DXC had ever done an open rescue. They were doing it in Australia. And I was so inspired. And that was also kind of the first time I learned about what was happening to chickens in factory farms. So I kind of learned about like the rescue of these animals and open rescue at the same time that I started to learn about what was happening to animals in the industry.
Mm.
And it was very inspiring to me, and also devastating because I was learning that the chickens who I loved so much, that there were chickens just like them who were being exploited and abused in just horrendous ways. So I emailed NSW Hen Rescue, and I didn't tell them how old I was, but I just asked them if they had any advice on how I could do something like that in California. And I asked my mom, can we start a chicken rescue? And she said, maybe. And I was just so excited she didn't say no, that things kind of took off from there. And I started a website, called it Happy Hen Chicken Rescue. Now it's Happy Hen Animal Sanctuary because we rescue more than just chickens. But yeah, when my mom saw the website and everything, she was like, okay, fine, we can rescue 12 hens, but that's going to be it. We're not going to rescue any more chickens after those 12. So we were able to arrange to rescue 12 hens from Cal Poly University, which is here in San Luis Obispo, where the sanctuary is. And Cal Poly has an ag school. And a really disturbing thing about their ag school is that they basically assembled like small scale factory farms where the conditions are the same as any other factory farm. There's a smaller scale because they want college students to learn about factory farming.
Mhm.
So yeah, we were able to rescue 12 hens from their like model factory egg farm on campus. And from there, we just kind of knew we had to keep doing it.
Yeah, and Happy Hen Animal Sanctuary is just a beautiful place. There's so many happy animals, as the name implies, and it's
Thank you.
just it really is a sanctuary. I've been to a number of sanctuaries, but Happy Hen is one of the most beautiful and pristine. And
Oh, thank you.
it's a credit to you, and of course your mother, who works so hard every day, picking
Yeah.
up poop,
Yeah.
caring for the animals. And it's funny, I was with your mother doing some poop scooping, and she was saying, "Oh, I love this. I love this stuff." Like,
Yeah.
she really gets into it.
Yeah. She's like, she doesn't want to do social media. She doesn't want to like sit at a computer. She just wants to scoop poop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know she's really proud of you and probably pretty worried about you because of what you've mentioned already. You've got an ankle monitor on, you're facing years in prison, all for rescuing animals. But I'm telling your story for you. Why don't you tell me a little bit about how you ended up with this ankle monitor and what you're facing coming up?
Yeah. So, well, there's a lot to this story. It's
Mhm.
somewhat complicated, weirdly. So in June of 2023, I entered Purdue's Petaluma Poultry Slaughterhouse in Sonoma County. I'd been investigating the company for several months prior to that and just exposed horrendous abuse. I'd reported that to law enforcement agencies in Sonoma County. I didn't receive a response from most agencies, and I got like a very dismissive email from the Sonoma County District Attorney's office, essentially saying that they weren't going to do anything about it. Um, and so, kind of feeling like I had no other option. In June, I entered the slaughterhouse disguised as a worker, and I rescued 4 hens. Their names are Poppy, Ivy, Aster, and Azalea. They were covered in scratches and bruises, infested with parasites. They were very sick, and I got them veterinary care. Um, and then months after that, and over the several months after that rescue, nothing happened. The company still was not prosecuted. I was also not prosecuted. And when Wayne went on trial for, his rescues at Reichardt Duck Farm, or alleged rescues at Reichardt Duck Farm, he didn't actually, but somehow he
Yeah,
got
he didn't
convicted for
actually
it
do it.
anyway. But actual, rescues at Sunrise Farms. Um, you know, at his sentencing hearing, I was arrested, but kind of what happened was during his trial, I went back to Reichardt Duck Farm, which I'd actually rescued ducks in 2019, but I wasn't charged. They singled out Wayne for that, so I went back to Reichardt while Wayne was on trial and investigated the company again. Found the cruelty was still happening. It was still very, very serious, and I rescued 2 ducks who were on the verge of death, River and Oakley. And then when Wayne was convicted, we released their stories, we released those investigations. And then, like I said, I was arrested at Wayne's sentencing hearing. So I was arrested on 7 felonies and 5 misdemeanors. And it's a little bit complicated because originally I was arrested by the sheriff's office because they'd gotten a Ramey warrant for me to be arrested for the Reichardt rescue that I had
Mhm.
done. So that was 2 felonies. And those charges were never filed. And then when they arrested me on that warrant that the sheriff's office had obtained, the Petaluma Police Department, their detective came in and was just kind of like, "Oh, well, we also had a warrant that we just issued for your arrest as well, for 5 felonies for the rescue at Petaluma Poultry at the slaughterhouse." So I basically ended up getting arrested on 2 warrants at the same time.
Mhm.
And the yeah, so the 2 Reichardt felonies have never been filed, but even though they never filed them, um, when I went to my bail hearing, the prosecutors essentially argued that because of the Reichardt situation, that is why I should have an ankle monitor. So if you hear me saying like I have an ankle monitor because I rescued a duck, like that's why I'm saying that, even though those
Mhm.
charges haven't been filed, because the prosecutors essentially said that because of that specifically, that's why I need to have an ankle monitor. But I don't apparently actually need to be charged with that. I just need to be charged with peddling of poultry. The whole thing makes no sense, and it doesn't really make sense that they're even allowed to do that, allowed to, give you pretrial conditions like an ankle monitor based on something they're not actually charging you for.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's all very strange.
Yeah, you've had that ankle monitor now for a long time, right?
Yeah, almost 250 days.
Yeah. Um, it must be kind of annoying. But at
Yeah.
least it's a talking point you can use, you know? Yeah. I mean, so yeah, their arrest of you on Wayne's sentencing was sort of um I think they did it for dramatic effect or something. Like they thought, "Oh, this is going to just terrify all these activists. Wayne's going to jail and Zoe's getting arrested and Rocky and Conrad are getting arrested and there's just this shit storm of arrests." But I don't know, like they should know you better than that. Like maybe they intimidate some people, but they don't seem to have intimidated you at all because you seem to be just like bring it on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm ultimately like not afraid of this prosecution, and I'm excited to take this case to trial because I want to share the stories of these animals. I want the world to know who Poppy, Ivy, Aster, and Azalea are, and I want them to know what Purdue's peddling poultry did to them.
Mhm.
And obviously I think it's outrageous that they're prosecuting animal rescue, especially when they should be prosecuting these companies that are abusing animals. But it's also an opportunity in many ways to get the word out and to elevate these animal stories. And hopefully, I eventually get enough public pressure on the Sonoma County District Attorney's Office and Sheriff's Office that they will actually do the right thing and use these
Mhm.
resources to prosecute Reichardt and Purdue and other companies.
Yeah. So when did you, I guess because when you were 11 years old, you were inspired by an open rescue. So I guess right from the start of your activism, had you always had that sort of um, goal as sort of like a strategy of like, okay, well, we can rescue these animals, and then if we're arrested, we can also elevate the story as well, or did that evolve for you?
It definitely evolved for me. I think when I first got involved in animal rights, I really just wanted to help get animals out of the industry. And to me, like I didn't fully even understand what open rescue was and what it meant until a few years after
Mhm.
um, I found the video from NSW Hen Rescue. I remember when I emailed them and I was like, "How do I do this?" And she's like, um, they told me like we just go in and we just take them out. And I was like, I must be misunderstanding here. They don't just go in. They don't just go in and take like obviously something else is happening here. So I was honestly confused by it. I was inspired by it, but I was confused. I didn't understand what they were talking about and how they were doing this. And when I was 12, that's when I first heard about Direct Action Everywhere, and I started organizing with them for their first protest or first investigation release campaign. So they released the Whole Foods investigation at one of Whole Foods egg suppliers, and I was, organizing a protest around that release in San Luis Obispo, and that was like when I kind of started to grasp what open rescue was. And then I was like, oh, I think NSW Hen Rescue literally just meant that they walk in and they take them out.
Mhm.
Like, this
Mhm.
is what they're talking about. Um, and even then though, I still like I didn't fully understand like any of the legal stuff and the significance of that. I was more starting to understand the importance of, not only getting animals out of the industry, but also sharing their stories and making sure that as many people as possible can connect with that animal and see them as an individual. Um, and why that's so much more powerful than a traditional investigation that just shows the violence and the abuse.
Yeah. Well, are you able to tell some of the story of the animals that you just rescued, uh, and share their story? In terms of like, the story obviously doesn't end for animals after they're rescued. A lot of these animals need a serious amount of care, because of the conditions that they were placed in. So, what was the condition of the animals? You alluded to it already, but what sort of care did they need, and are they still in good condition, or did they get into good condition?
Yeah, so Poppy, Ivy, Aster, and Azalea, those are the four chickens from the slaughterhouse. And yeah, like I said, they were all covered in scratches. They had parasites called coccidia parasites. And Poppy was probably the sickest of the four. She had an injured toe. I We don't know exactly how it was injured. I think it's possible it was smashed when she was being loaded into the transport crates, like smashed between crates potentially, but
Mm,
can't say for sure. And she also developed a very severe respiratory infection and was having trouble breathing, and you know, just had like mucus in her lungs and in her nose, and they all got veterinary care, of course, and they did all ultimately recover, which I'm very thankful for. And they're all, as far as I know, doing well and living out their lives. I, haven't really spent time with them since their rescue, but yeah, my understanding is they're doing well.
great.
And then River and Oakley are the two ducks who I rescued from Reichardt,
Mhm,
and like I said, they were like literally on the verge of death. I still like cannot believe that they both recovered and survived what they went through at Reichardt.
mhm,
River was on his back, and this has been a common thing we found at Reichardt where ducks will collapse on their backs and they'll be flailing, paddling their legs, just unable to get up. And what we've found is that this is likely a result of disease, probably combined with the uneven wire flooring that they're forced to
mhm,
live on.
mhm,
So he had been on his back for a long time, and we could tell that because his back was covered in bloody wounds because he'd been, scraping up against the wire floor as he was struggling to get back up. His wings were bleeding because he'd been flapping. He was just screaming out and crying and trying to get help.
mhm,
And when I turned him over, sometimes when we've been at Reichardt doing investigations, sometimes when we turn a duck over, they're kind of okay. Like, they stumble and but they kind of are able to stay up at least for several minutes, and they might fall over again if they have another issue. But he just like immediately collapsed and fell on his face. And he was like trying to walk, but he couldn't. He just kept collapsing and collapsing, and um, ended up picking him up. And he just like looked at me like and like was looking around like he just didn't even know where he was, and like it felt like he was losing his mind, and like I was thinking, oh, he's probably about to die, and that's why he's so confused and kind of delirious. So I was expecting him to die, but I was kind of thinking, we'll get him out, we'll give him a chance, and at least if he does die, he'll be dying in a more comfortable place. And then Oakley, she was collapsed on the ground, and she had a swollen leg that was injured, and she couldn't stand, she couldn't walk, and she was slowly dying of starvation and dehydration. Her leg was very infected, and she was going to
mhm,
become septic and die.
mhm,
So we took her out as well. I wasn't sure if either of them would survive. Um, but they were both hospitalized for 5 days, getting intensive care, and ultimately they both did recover. Oakley did pass away a few months ago. She never fully recovered from her leg infection. It never really went fully
Mhm.
away. She was able to have some quality of life though for the months that she lived. And River is still alive, and he's actually doing really, really well.
Hmm. One of the things that just goes through my mind as you're describing this is just my appreciation for how every one of these animals is a friend, an individual, and you're not going to hear that from the companies. Obviously, they're just units, and so even someone like me, who's an activist, and um, it's even hard for me to see the individuals sometimes because it's on such a massive scale. You've got so many animals crammed in. So I really appreciate that all the animals you rescue, you remember their story. I mean, you take an active part in their recovery, and yeah, that's what I think is really powerful for juries to hear, especially when you're going on trial. Now, the most interaction that I've had with you, Zoe, was during the Sonoma trial, where you were a witness, and you mentioned that disease for the ducks. I think it was Remarella, right? If I'm remembering correctly, yeah. And we had this struggle throughout the trial of what we could say
Yeah.
because the judge and the prosecutor were disputing, basically disallowing us from saying these words. So your testimony was complicated by what you couldn't say. Your mother's testimony as well, as she was our veterinary expert. Um, and you still did a great job of explaining things to the jury. Actually, you were a hit. They really liked you, I think. um, but can you just tell me a little of the frustration that you must be feeling when you're trying to tell the story to a jury and you're being hamstrung the entire way?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, like there there were a lot of rules, and like I basically felt like if I slipped up, the threat of slipping up was a mistrial. And obviously we
Mm,
didn't want a mistrial. So there was a lot of pressure to like remember what I couldn't say. I
yeah,
wasn't allowed
yeah,
to say like the word Remarella, the disease. I wasn't allowed to
yeah. And
yeah,
even
I
though
wasn't
you
allowed to like
had,
any conclusions about the duck's condition,
yeah,
essentially, even though
and
we
you
knew.
weren't, and just to cut in, you weren't speculating about Remarella, maybe
No.
initially, but you had evidence that they were suffering from Remarella, and we couldn't even show that.
Right, yeah, I mean, we were never fully speculating because, I mean, at first, like, I had never seen ducks falling on their backs like that. That was nothing I'd ever heard of, and, I'd been caring for ducks for many years, and so, I was actually asked to come and help and, um, figure out what was happening to these ducks. So that was kind of why I ended up getting like called in at the end of the investigation, because the
Mhm.
investigators who'd been working on exposing Reichart were just so confused, like why is this happening? So I went and did disease testing, and that's when the results came back and said it was Remarella, which made a lot of sense once we knew that, because a very classic symptom of Remarella is ducks falling on their backs and being
Mhm.
unable to right themselves. But yeah, even though we had those test results, we weren't allowed to make that conclusion in front of the jury. We also had test results from animal services because they'd
Mhm.
collected ducks after the rescue and action. They'd taken the dead ducks that activists were holding, and they'd done their own necropsies on those ducks. And they also tested positive for Remarella and some other diseases, but we weren't allowed to talk about that. So that was very frustrating. Another thing I remember is we weren't allowed to use the word necessary because the necessity defense had been
Oh,
denied.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, Even mistake of law for necessity had been denied. So, like, not only was I not allowed to mention the necessity defense, I wasn't allowed to say that rescuing the animals was necessary. And
Right.
I was like, but it was necessary. It was necessary for them. So yeah, that was frustrating, and it definitely like was eye-opening to how corrupt the legal system is, particularly this legal system in Sonoma County, how
Mhm.
biased they are to protecting this industry. Because at times, like, I didn't get to watch most of the trial because I was sequestered as a witness. Um, but stuff I was like hearing about what wasn't being allowed, or when I was able to be in the courtroom, it just really, I don't know, it felt gross. Like Wayne wasn't even allowed to present a defense. Like there wasn't a defense case
Mhm.
allowed to
Yeah.
be made. And that's not how our legal system is supposed to work. You're supposed to be allowed to defend yourself in a court of law. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I
yeah,
learned that so much of what happens in a trial happens before the jury is even seated, so they don't get to witness a lot of, a lot of the shenanigans, basically, because it's um, and so it makes me really skeptical of the entire system because you would expect that, yeah, Wayne would have been able to just present his defense and they could weigh up whether it's true or false. And obviously, all the evidence was on our side, and that's why they weren't letting us share it. But yeah, so for these ducks suffering from Remarella, it's heartbreaking footage because they'll try to stand, they'll fall back down, they'll try to stand and fall back down. And we were trying to make the point that they weren't able to reach food or water. And you could just see in the footage, it would be nearly impossible for that duck to reach any kind of food or water.
yeah, absolutely. Like so many of these ducks were dying because they couldn't, or like it was a combination of so many things. They were
Mhm.
diseased and they were dying from disease, and then they were dying quicker because they couldn't get to food and water. And they had injuries and foot infections. There were just so many things going on that we weren't really allowed to detail. I mean, when I think about like River's situation, like when we rescued him, he literally couldn't lift up his head.
Mhm.
Like, how is a duck who can't lift their head going to be able to drink water and eat food without assistance? I was tube feeding River and Oakley for many, many days after they got out of the hospital because they weren't eating on their own.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and obviously, Reichardt Duck Farm is not going to be tube feeding their ducks and providing them with medication and specialized care and making sure that if they can't walk, that there's, a food bowl right next to them, that they're propped up and like in a special, physical therapy cart so that they're not falling on their backs. Like that's not the Reichardt's model. They're a for-profit company. And when a duck is sick, if they happen to notice, which often they clearly don't notice when a duck is sick and dying, but when they do notice, they snap their necks, and we also have evidence of that. A lot of the ducks who are in the dumpsters, they have dislocated necks, so that's what they're doing.
Mhm.
They're doing cervical dislocation as
Yeah.
basically what, from what we can tell, their only form of medical treatment, which is
Yeah.
that's medical treatment.
No. Another thing with that we really couldn't talk about during the trial. So knowing how it works in Sonoma County now, or having that experience, you still say that you're not really worried about the charges you're facing, even though you're facing many years in prison. How many years max in prison are you facing?
I'm currently facing up to 8 years in prison. My charges have changed around a lot as they do. They
Mhm.
like to arrest you on as much as they can, and then of
Yeah,
course
it'll
a judge
probably
can.
change
Yeah,
before I
yeah,
even publish this again because they
maybe.
can't seem to get it together.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
okay, so 8 years in prison.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, I think I would probably be feeling more confident that we could win at trial if it wasn't in Sonoma County. I think there's definitely a feeling going into this trial of like, what are we going to be able to say? Are we going to be able to do anything? It's, is the judge going to potentially rule differently from another judge in the same courthouse? Probably not. So, most likely, all of the rulings that Judge Basalia made in Wayne's case will stand in my case. And that's a scary thing going in. Like, how much of the animal cruelty evidence will get in? Will they allow any form of defense? There are a lot of questions, and obviously we won't get those questions answered for probably a few more months. But um,
Mhm.
I don't necessarily have a huge amount of confidence that we'll win at trial. I think if we're allowed to tell the jury what happened, like honestly tell them what happened, all the facts, I feel very confident that a reasonable jury would acquit based on that and would understand the horror of what is happening at Petaluma Poultry. Um, but obviously, that's likely not going to be the case. So I don't know. We'll
Mhm.
see. I think, still, regardless of what happens in this case, like none of the repercussions that I am facing or will potentially face will compare to what these animals are going through.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, another thing I'll add is, I had a court hearing where the prosecutors said that they weren't going to ask for prison time, but then the they amended the complaint a week later, and they added aggravating factors to my criminal complaint, which is essentially what they do when they wanna ask for, like, towards the maximum sentence.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Yeah.
so we think that they just told the judge that, because they at that time my attorney was arguing that my charges should be reduced from felonies to misdemeanors, and
Mhm.
they said, to the judge, like, "Oh, you don't need to do that. We're not even asking for prison time. Just, like, keep the felonies." And then a week later, after the judge kept the felonies, they're like, "Oh, we're gonna add aggravating factors," and all this stuff.
So ridiculous. Well, at least we've already had a preview of what their prosecution will probably look like, and your testimony was a great example because when Bob Wayner got up to ask you a bunch of questions, he really focused on, are you vegan? Have you taken the liberation pledge? And did you did you disrupt a basketball game and cause these poor basketball fans to have to witness something that probably was really entertaining for them?
I know, he asked that question about the basketball game, like I had, like, exposed myself in front of children or something. I'm like,
Oh
I
yeah.
I'm pretty sure that was, like, the most entertaining part of that entire game. In fact, like, I'm not even kidding, I literally get messages from Timberwolves fans asking me to come disrupt another game because they think
Really?
that animal rights disruptors were their good luck charm because every time we disrupted, they won the game, and every time we didn't disrupt that season, they lost. So they're like, "Come back, please."
Wow, either you were disrupting a lot or they were terrible.
Yeah, we did disrupt quite a few times. I only disrupted once, but other
Yeah.
people disrupted
I
some.
think I haven't really followed it that closely. I think Minnesota was good this year, though. Weren't they in the I think they were in the playoffs. Maybe you pay attention to the
I do
Timberwolves
not
more?
don't pay attention at all. The only sports games I've ever been to, I've disrupted. I don't go
Well,
I don't go to sports games otherwise.
let's explain why you disrupted the Minnesota
Yeah,
Timberwolves just so that people understand.
yeah. So the, owner of the Timberwolves basketball team, Glenn Taylor, he runs a factory egg farm, and he had an avian flu outbreak at one of his farms and used a ventilation shutdown to essentially roast millions of chickens alive. Very, very inhumane way of killing animals. Not that there is a humane way, but it's an especially inhumane way of killing animals.
Yeah.
And then he received like millions of dollars of taxpayer payer bailout money. So we were disrupting Timberwolves games to both raise awareness about ventilation shutdown and what Glenn Taylor and other companies were doing, and also to request that Glenn Taylor donate the taxpayer money that he'd received. This very wealthy man, donate
Mhm.
that money to animal sanctuaries to help rescue animals.
Yeah, and I assume you haven't heard a peep from Glenn Taylor.
No, but he was actually I didn't realize it when I was doing the disruption, but he was actually, right behind me when I chained
What?
myself to the basketball court. And
Wow.
I threw a bunch of flyers out that had his face on it. It said, "Glenn
Oh,
Taylor roast
wow.
animals alive." I wonder if he caught one.
I hope he caught one.
I hope
Maybe he
so.
did. That's amazing. Well, yeah. So Bob Weiner gets up in front of the jury and asking you about this game, and he says something like, "The people didn't buy a ticket to see Zoe Rosenberg that night, did they?"
Yeah, and I was like, he literally expected me to answer that question. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, they did not.
Yeah. But as we've said, it was definitely the most entertaining part of that game, I assume. And so yeah, they
Yeah,
got more than they paid for.
I know. I just added to the show.
You added to the show. So yeah, and then as you mentioned, he did keep bringing up children, and I think he was referring specifically to you being on your college campus at UC Berkeley and doing this sort of fountain disruption where you did like fake blood or something. I
Yeah,
can't remember, but he was like, "Were there any children around, Zoe?"
yeah.
And now I pose the same question to you, Zoe. Were there any children around?
At that fountain disruption, there was actually nobody around, fun fact, because it was in the midst of, like, COVID, when COVID was, like, really bad in 2020, and everyone was still, like, super freaked out, and,
Mhm.
UC Berkeley's campus was just dead. So, like,
Oh.
not only were there no children, there was just nobody there.
But you did say at the trial that it had sort of become like a hit on
It
campus,
has.
like
So we've done it several times now since
mhm.
when there have been people around.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I still like there really aren't kids walking around the UC Berkeley campus. I mean, I think a kid could handle it. It's not real
Mhm.
blood, and I think kids can understand that and grasp that concept. So I don't think they'd be freaked out by it. But there really
What are
aren't
your
kids on campus.
what do your classmates think of all of your activism? Are they fans?
I don't know. I mean, I assume they probably wouldn't tell me to my face if they weren't fans, but
Yeah.
I think people are supportive. I mean,
Mhm.
I like I'll sometimes on like the first day of class or whatever, people will be like, "So, like, what what student clubs are you part of or whatever?" And I'll be like, "Oh, I'm part of like this group," and then they'll be like, "No one have never heard of it or whatever," and I'll be like, "We're the ones who do the fountains on campus," and they're like, "Oh yeah, I've seen that," and they think
Yeah.
it's cool. Um, yeah, I mean, I think people are supportive. Our
Mhm.
campaign over the last couple years has been to get the dining halls to move away from factory farming in their sourcing to drop companies like Tyson Foods, and that's not a super controversial thing at UC Berkeley.
Mhm. Mhm. So do you think it's a likely thing that you could get done?
So we've gotten them to cut ties with quite a few companies.
Oh, good job. Yeah.
Yeah. So on the first day of school in fall 2020, we released our first investigation at a UC Berkeley supplier. It was Seaboard Foods,
Mhm.
their pork supplier at the time. And we locked down to say their gate, which is like the classic famous gate at the front of the UC Berkeley campus. And within a few hours of locking down, they announced that they were cutting ties with Seaboard and would never buy from Seaboard again.
Mhm.
And then um, uh, I kind of reached out to them to follow up and was able through that to get them to commit to dropping Butterball Turkey because Butterball owns 50% of Seaboard. Or maybe it's the other way around, but they're like tied companies. So they dropped Butterball. And then um, we got them to drop a couple other companies like Harris Ranch, and then yeah, where we kind of got stuck for a while was on Tyson Foods. We released an investigation of Tyson Foods. They just would not drop Tyson, and we spent a couple years on that campaign, and yeah, they did somewhat recently finally drop Tyson Foods.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, and they also have recently made a commitment to move more more in the direction of serving plant-based foods in the dining halls,
Interesting.
which is good.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I know that there's been a lot of progress made in that direction in the UK, and then we have that group, the Allied Scholars, which is trying to do the same thing
Mhm.
on campuses around the country. So, yeah, positive development. I mean, I guess the impact could be large considering that people who are going to college to sort of expand their mind, or, further their career into some, or, start their career in some direction. They can take those sort of values that maybe they've learned on campus, of a more compassionate approach to animals.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be very impactful. So when you started activism, what were your sort of first forms of activism that you started with?
Yeah, well, obviously, I started Happy Hen Animal Sanctuary, and then,
Mm,
kind of more in the activism direction. The first thing I did was I actually organized a protest at the San Luis Obispo Bacon Festival,
mm,
and, uh yeah, that was interesting. I I promoted it and I tried to get other people to come, but, like, I think one person came. So it was a
uh,
very, very small protest at a, pretty popular festival,
mm,
and there was, like, a line going, like, down the street to get into this bacon festival, and I'm standing out there with a megaphone, and,
mm.
um, I was, I guess I would have been 12 at the time,
Wow.
and, everybody in that line at one point all started chanting, "Bacon, bacon, bacon,"
Hmm.
to try to, like, drown me out, and I just, like, turned the megaphone up.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and yeah, that was the first protest, but I thought it was fun, and I
You
wanted
thought
to
it
do
was fun.
more. Yeah, I was a
So a lot of
strange kid.
people, yeah,
Uh,
so you didn't seem to have much fear. A lot of people are afraid to even get on a bullhorn, but here you are at 12 years old at a pretty hostile area, I would think, a bacon festival. That's where you're definitely going to get the bacon chants at the bacon
yeah,
festival.
yeah.
So why do you think you have it's like you're missing that part of your brain that feels fear or something?
I don't know. I mean, I think I've actually always been a very, very anxious person. I, like, grew
Mm,
up as a very anxious, very shy kid, um, and had, like, a lot of social anxiety, and I still do to some extent, but I feel like I've always, like, I'm anxious about things that don't make sense, that, like, nor like, most people probably aren't anxious about, and then the things that I'm not anxious about, like, any reasonable person would probably be super anxious about.
mm,
Like, I'm just, like, inverted. I don't know.
hmm.
Like, having, like,
Yeah.
a one-on-one conversation with someone I just met, like, oh, that's stressful. But,
Mhm.
you know, getting booed by 100 people while I'm speaking on a megaphone, like, that's fine. It's very strange. I don't know why that is.
Do you get
Um,
like a rush feeling from it? Does it excite you, or
yeah, I mean, it excites me to some extent. I do think protesting is, like, one of the more fun forms of activism, at least sometimes,
Mhm,
not always. Sometimes it's boring and tedious. But I do think it can be very exciting and entertaining, and
mhm,
also very effective, which
mhm,
makes it a great thing to do. Um, yeah, but I don't know. I think too, like, for the most part with, like, with my activism, it's easier for me to kind of put any fears that I do have aside, for most things. Like, I was very, very nervous, before the Timberwolves disruption,
mhm,
partly because it just felt like there was so much on the line. Like, Alicia had just super glued her hand to the court at the previous game, and so there was this kind of like this, and that had gone, like, so well, and there's kind
mhm,
of this, like, expectation that we were gonna have another thing like that, um, and, like, all the basketball fans kind of already had an expectation too of, like, these protests going really well, and so I was like, "Oh my god, I cannot be the one to mess this up." Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and there's, like, a police officer, like, guarding the court the entire time, like, I had to, like, walk right past, and I was just like, "Oh my god, how am I gonna do this?" And I was very nervous. But I think for me, like, am able to find a lot of courage in, like, moments where I'm getting very nervous, from the animals who I have connections with, and I
Mhm,
think, that's something I wish more animal rights activists had, was, like, a relationship with animals, especially
mhm,
not just with obviously, like a lot of people have relationships with a dog or a cat who they adopted or rescued, however, and that's great and powerful. But I think there's something different about having a relationship with an animal who's been rescued from the industry, and being able to kind of do the activism, do the work that you're doing for them, um, versus like kind of more of an abstract idea of who you're doing it for. Like, it's harder for me to, you know, connect on a really emotional level with this like abstract idea of, oh yeah, I know animals are being abused, I know they're being exploited, and I want to do something and I want to stop that. And that is motivating, of course, but it's so much more
Mhm,
motivating to be like, okay, I'm doing this for Glenn, or I'm doing this for Georgia, because
mhm.
I understand what they went through and I understand who they are.
Yeah. Glenn, by the way, I think that's the rooster, right? Glenn.
Yes,
Yeah, and yeah, Glenn, he wanders around your house like a dog,
he
like a
does.
prince. He comes, he'll come to the door and he'll make his presence known, and then he gets let into the house and he wanders around and he's very cuddly. Glenn's great.
He is. He's the best. Yeah, I love Glenn so much.
Is Glenn named after Glenn Taylor?
He's not. No.
Okay, good.
No, he was named before that.
Okay. Well, so okay, that's interesting. So you said you do feel nerves sometimes, like at the Timberwolves game, you felt like your heart pounding. So there's maybe a moment where you're like, oh, I've got to like summon the courage, and you just kind of meditatively think about Glenn or some of these other animals, and that gives you the added boost that you need to go and do it.
Yeah, there in particular, I share this story a lot, but there's one chicken who I like think about in those moments where like I'm feeling really afraid to do something, or I'm even if I'm just also like in situations where I'm feeling burnt out or I kind of want to give up. In those moments, I think about Georgia, who is a
Mhm.
hen. She was one of the hens we rescued when kind of towards the early days of Happy Hen Animal Sanctuary. She was from a factory egg farm, and she had her abdomen was full of eggs. What was happening was she had a reproductive disease that was causing her eggs to just go into her abdomen instead of coming out, and that weight was
Oh
building up,
God.
and it was slowly killing her. But she was like, despite you know despite having to carry all of those eggs and have such a huge burden on her body, she was like the most cheerful hen, and had such a huge personality, would wander all around, and she would come to our door, kind of like Glenn, and she would peck at the door. She'd ask for treats, and she was just such a sweet hen, and as she was passing away, I made a promise to her that I would fight until no more animals have to go through what she did.
Mhm,
So yeah, I think a lot about that promise that I made to her, and
mhm.
I think, okay, I have to do this. I have to just go onto that basketball court because I promised Georgia that I would.
Hmm. Well, you seem to be one of the more determined people that I've ever met. And so do you have these moments frequently where you need to sort of summon that, or is it just seldom from time to time?
It's not particularly frequent,
Hmm.
I wouldn't say, but yeah, from time to time, uh, there's definitely moments where you're kinda like, "Oh my god, is this," "is this actually leading to anything?" It's a lot of
Hmm.
a very difficult, tedious work often, and, obviously, people see a lot of the stuff that, is kinda the cool stuff, on the
Hmm.
front lines that's exciting, but there's also, of course, a lot of, like, tedious, hard work that happens behind the scenes, that people never get to hear about, um, and it can be draining at times, and so,
Yeah,
yeah, there are times when I just kind of feel exhausted, but, yeah, not super often. I usually
that's
feel
good.
pretty
Yeah.
motivated.
Yeah, yeah. You definitely you mentioned, feeling of like whether or not things are effective. I thought it was sort of interesting, and this is just like a very tiny anecdote, but it probably speaks to the responses that you get a lot. I had Almira on the show a few weeks ago, and she was describing the protest that you and her did, where you had poured some blood, fake blood, washable blood at a Safeway. And in any case, she ended up getting arrested for filming that protest. And I made a little snippet from our conversation and posted it to social media, and it did all right on TikTok. And a lot of the comments were just slamming you guys, of course, as we would expect. And one of them was like, you guys did absolutely nothing. And I'm thinking, like, and yet here you are watching it, commenting on it. You're being exposed to what they did. So obviously it did something. And I guess for those types of disruptive protests, which someone like Bob Weiner really loved to harp on, because I think they can be seen as like unpopular or whatever, they still get a ton of attention. And so what do you think, when you think about what's effective, how would you sort of like, if I don't know if there's like a hierarchy of what's effective or not, but what would you recommend to activists as far as that goes?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's hard to know how effective anything is at this moment because, down the road, we could look back at something that we totally thought at the time might have been a waste of time, might not have been effective, but maybe even years later led to some amazing opportunity for the movement, or impacted people in a way we didn't realize. Like,
Mhm.
maybe somebody watched some 5-minute disruption that I did, and from that inspired them to become a full-time animal rights activist, and they'll go on to do some incredible thing that makes a huge impact on the world. Like, you never know the impact of your actions.
Mhm.
And I think that's an important thing to recognize, that there are unknown impacts of everything, good and bad, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Maybe someone also saw a disruption and decided that they were never going to become an animal rights activist. I don't know. But um,
I doubt
that
it.
person probably wasn't going to anyway.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a very hard thing to measure, but it is
Mhm.
something like I'm very passionate about thinking about, and actually
Mhm.
designing my own major at UC Berkeley on social movement strategy. So it's something I think about quite a bit. I definitely am a believer in the kind of social movement ideology that is, a social movement is only as effective as it is disruptive. And I think that's
Mhm.
very true. And obviously, the word disruptive can mean a lot of different things. You know, Actually doing something that's just a disruption, like, what I did at
Mhm.
the Timberwolves game or at the grocery store, that's disruptive. But also something like rescuing an animal, which seems so peaceful and chill, and it is also so disruptive because this industry relies on creating this image and this narrative that animals are not individuals. They rely on people not connecting with the who behind, um, this violent industry. Like, they don't want people to meet these animals. So that is disruptive. Something like a legislative battle can be disruptive. It can take the industry, away from their day-to-day routine, and make them spend a huge amount of resources on fighting, um, a ballot measure like we have in Sonoma County right now.
Mhm.
So, the disruptive, I just think, means a lot of things, but I think disrupting the status quo, is really crucial, and it probably the most crucial thing, in being a successful social movement. Because if people kind of aren't disrupted, if their day to day lives aren't disrupted, if they're not forced to think about these issues, if this doesn't become something that's political, that's talked about, that's an issue on the table, then we're never going
Mhm.
to get anywhere. Like, the
Yeah.
first step in every social movement is just getting these conversations started, and that's very difficult with
Mhm.
something that's often
Yeah.
so new.
Yeah, and that's what you're doing a great job of getting these conversations started. And yeah, I always think about like as an activist, if I'm feeling comfortable, then probably my quote unquote adversary, and I don't mean to paint them as an adversary, but they're probably feeling comfortable as well. Um, so so that's one way that I been able to like muster up courage too is just like I'm not really necessarily here to have fun
Mhm.
or to feel comfortable. Like maybe it's just uncomfortable, this whole thing. And the whole
Yeah.
thing, the whole thing is uncomfortable. And like you said, and it's a great point to put to mention that it's just nothing compared to what the animals go through. So
Yeah.
I mean, a few moments of discomfort for me is nothing compared to what an animal's going to experience in their unfortunately very brief life. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with Saul Alinsky. He's a social movement scholar, and he wrote Rules for Radicals, which is a book kind of giving some strategic advice to social movements. And he lays out 10 rules, and one of those rules is, the risk is almost never scarier than the thing itself. Like, what you're
Mm,
facing as, the discomfort of saying something and making someone upset, or of facing charges, that's never going to be as scary as the actual thing you're fighting against. That's always
mhm.
far, far scarier. And
Yeah.
another rule that he has that kind of came to mind with what you were saying is, always, as much as possible, always go outside of the comfort zone of your enemy. Try to put them in a situation where they don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And you do that quite well, because they often just seem like completely at a loss for how to deal with you. um, I mean, even when they've had time to prepare and they have a trial, it just seems like they're completely baffled. Um, Yeah. Well, you did mention the Sonoma ballot measure, so we should talk about that for sure. Because as you mentioned, this could be one of the more effective ways to disrupt the system that we're living under. So, what can you tell me about this ballot measure, and of course, this convergence that is upcoming as well?
Yeah, so Measure J is going to be voted on in November in Sonoma County. It's, kind of basically the first measure of its kind in the United States to be on a ballot, which is very, very exciting. It would prohibit concentrated animal feeding operations as they're defined by the EPA. And all the definitions are very complicated, but essentially what it would mean, for the animals in Sonoma County, is that it would be prohibiting the large concentrated animal feeding operations in the county. So there's small, medium, and large. Um, the medium and the small definitions are a little bit complicated, and technically none of the facilities meet those definitions that are in Sonoma County. So only the large CAFOs will either be forced to downsize or close down if this measure passes. So those large facilities, is about 21. They collectively confine more than 3 million animals.
Hmm.
So that could be a huge impact. On real animals, which is very, very exciting. It wouldn't close down every factory farm in Sonoma County. There, unfortunately, are some large, I mean, in my eyes, large facilities. We're using, again, the definition of the
Mhm.
EPA, but in my eyes, there are some large facilities that wouldn't be closed. So, it's definitely not going to be the end of the struggle in Sonoma County if this passes, but it'll be a huge step in the right direction. And I hope that it will set an example for other counties, for the state of California, for other states, that this is possible, and
Yeah.
that, we don't need to continue relying on factory farming, that we can start to move away from it. And even if it doesn't pass, I think it's gotten so many conversations started about the issues, both by, within Sonoma County and outside of Sonoma County. So that's very exciting. And we have a convergence, like you mentioned, coming up in a few weeks, where
Mhm.
people are going to come out and support and help try to talk to voters in Sonoma County. We want to, reach as many people as we can. We've been doing outreach at farmers markets and events. Folks are out at the Sonoma County Fair right now at the table, which is,
Mhm.
a little bit of an interesting environment for our people. It's kind of more of an agriculture scene,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of people who go to the fair who want to hear about Measure J, and hopefully people can answer their questions.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so it's been an interesting campaign for us. Like, it's definitely not our area of expertise. It's like you said, it's we're outside of our comfort zones. We're a little
Mhm.
uncomfortable because we're not primarily a political group, and by that I mean like we don't usually work within the political system.
Mhm.
Obviously, animal rights I view as somewhat political, but um, yeah, so it's definitely been a learning experience for us, I think. But yeah, I think it's definitely dis- disrupted a lot of things in Sonoma County.
For
I think the
sure.
opposition is raising a lot of money to
Mhm.
try
And
to
spending a lot of money.
spending a lot of money. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just posted this morning on my Instagram about how the Sonoma County Sheriff's Association actually donated $5,000 to oppose
Mhm.
Measure J. So, they've got like all their allies out in full force.
The Sheriff's Association. So, I mean, if you needed any more evidence that,
Yeah.
law enforcement and the court system was, you know, I mean, yeah, it's very frustrating, but
Yeah.
it's nice that, you have these, open secrets websites and you can see where all this money is coming from. But yeah,
Yeah.
didn't they? I think I saw Amira say something the other day that I think it was like about $500,000 already so far spent, 500,000, and that's just what you know
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, I think about half a million. So yeah, they're spending a lot of money. I think a lot of it's been spent on legal fees,
Mm,
um, which is interesting. We don't know exactly, what those legal fees are, but
mhm.
yeah,
Well, we do
and they
know that
are,
there's been some interesting things happening with the Board of Commissioners, how they have
yeah,
uh, disrupted, there's a word again, disrupted their own system to sort
yeah,
of like put their thumb on the scale of this measure, which they're all in opposition to. Um,
yeah, yeah. The board of supervisors approved the language that was going to be on the ballot. The question itself, like what voters will be asked to vote on,
mhm,
um, like that had been drafted by the government in Sonoma County and approved by the board of supervisors, and then they basically um, went and had this vote kind of somewhat secretly. Like we weren't even reached out to, like the proponent of Measure J wasn't reached out to. Um, and we're going to do this vote to change that language and to remove all of the, like, to protect animals, to protect the environment, to protect public health, remove all of that language from the question. And that's like very typical to language to have in a question on ballot measures. It's been on that type of language has been on ballot measures in Sonoma County. And one of the board of supervisors, he kind of said, when we support a ballot measure, we don't have this conversation.
mhm,
And so he was actually the only one who voted to not change the language. Everybody else, unfortunately, voted to change it, which was very disturbing to see. Just how
mhm.
much sway this industry is having in Sonoma County. But I mean, I think the one good thing that kind of comes out of that is it also shows the public the corruption,
Mhm.
and makes it more plain to see exactly what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, it is it's interesting to see how much the agriculture industry has power over our political system. I think, were I to tell my friends about this, they might be surprised to learn that this is happening in such a dark blue state like California. And so, what do you think this says about our politics in terms of like, Democrat, Republican? I think, well, I'll just answer for myself personally. I think it shows that both parties are sort of, uh, both of them are, um, they both kowtow to the animal agriculture industry, unfortunately. Um, and it's very disappointing to see. I'm someone who have has always been a Democrat. I vote to the left as far as I can. Typically, I'm very much a Democrat, but since becoming vegan and since becoming an animal rights activist, that's one of my greatest disappointments, is to see that I'm not totally in alignment anymore with these people that, I thought were trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, yeah, no, I've had a similar experience. I when I registered to vote when I was 18, I registered as a Democrat, and um, kind of thought that that was going to be in alignment with my values. And yeah, I've also kind of been disappointed. Um, I mean, not just in animal rights, but also in animal rights. And I
Mhm,
mean, the Democratic Party, I do think it's better for the most part than the Republican Party in terms of
mhm,
animals, but it's still like the same old stuff of just catering to this industry.
mhm,
And it's disturbing, and it definitely, to me, is a reminder that we cannot rely on the political system to create change, to
mhm,
create the change we want to see. A lot of these things we have to do ourselves, and we have to do it outside of these political institutions. We have to take direct action, and
mhm.
yeah, it just highlights the necessity of that for me. Um, yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah,
disturbing.
I mean, these ballot measures are basically an in run around the politicians who should be doing the work. So there's the one in Sonoma County. There's also one in Denver, Colorado as well, to I think ban slaughterhouses and the fur industry. I think I have that right.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there'll be a fur ban and a slaughterhouse ban
Yeah,
in Denver.
yeah.
Hopefully they'll pass there. That would be amazing. Then we
Hmm.
have also the ballot measure in Berkeley, which will
Hmm.
also be the CAFO prohibition there. So that
Yeah.
was probably more likely to pass than the Sonoma County measure, but
Hmm. Hmm.
hopefully they both do.
Yeah, hopefully. Um, so what is the status of your case? Like, when is your next hearing? What's the next step for you?
Yeah, so right now we're waiting to get basically rebuttal arguments from the prosecution. So we filed a motion. When was it? It was, I guess, like a week and a half ago now,
Hmm.
saying that some of the charges that they added to my complaint should not be allowed to stand. So after my preliminary hearing, they added felony burglary and they added a new form of trespass, and then the felony conspiracy charge. They amended it to basically say that the conspiracy began months earlier. So before it just said like conspiracy on June 13th, 2023. And so they made it like April to June or something like that,
Hmm.
which is, their way of trying to get in more evidence and open the door to more things during the trial. So there are a few issues with what they did. One is they didn't actually even get permission from the court to amend my complaint and to add those charges. So they'd been given permission to amend my complaint to remove some charges, because after my preliminary hearing, the judge ruled that I was facing 4 counts of felony conspiracy. She basically said there's only one conspiracy. There are not 4 conspiracies. It was one rescue. It was one conspiracy. You have to basically condense that into one.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that was what the judge ordered the prosecutors to do. And then they went and they did do that, but then they added a bunch of charges, probably as kind of like a retaliatory thing, because they were unhappy that they lost 3 of their felonies. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, that's one issue that we're challenging. They didn't get leave of the court, and then we're also challenging that like they didn't present evidence at the preliminary hearing that would allow for them to extend the conspiracy by multiple months. And they also if we obviously had known that they were going to do that, it would also have opened the door to more during the preliminary hearing for our side to ask more questions, etc., to try to really understand what they're thinking for those months. So
Hmm.
there's issues with that. And then the one that's probably the most ridiculous is the burglary charge that they added. So they're basically saying felony burglary to of a sealed cargo container. So they're basically saying that alleging that I entered a sealed cargo container. The traditional definition of burglary is like, the entering a building, a structure with at least 3 walls and a roof with the intent to commit a felony. Um,
Hmm.
I did not enter any structures when I rescued those chickens. I didn't enter any structures that would meet that definition. So what they're trying to do is charge me with burglary of a sealed cargo container. But that is not a valid charge either, because you can see the videos. I've posted. The chickens are in like these plastic crates. They're kind of like a drawer that, like, you pull out the crate,
Hmm.
and then you can remove the chickens from the crate. It's like not sealed. It's plastic with like holes in it, and um, just closed with like a flimsy bungee cord. And so that there's that. It's like totally doesn't meet the definition of sealed, and then also it doesn't meet the legal definition of a cargo container. I
Hmm.
think legally a cargo container has to be like 1,000 square feet, or if they're like math, like when they're talking about burglary of a cargo container as the law is written, they're like referring to like these massive shipping containers that are like on boats, that are like
Hmm.
shipping things overseas. Um, so yeah, it's just kind of ridiculous. It's not the first time these prosecutors have kind of just done silly things.
Yeah.
Um, so we'll see. I mean, whether it'll be allowed to stand, we don't know, but they're supposed to reply, and challenge, or maybe they'll concede on some of the things, we don't know. And then we have a court hearing on September 4th, for oral.
Hmm.
Sorry, yeah, no, for September 4th, for oral
Hmm.
arguments. So that's my
Okay.
next court. And that's kind of, so yeah, things are kind of delayed by that right now, by what they added to the complaint and having to deal with that. Once that's dealt with, then I guess probably we'll start to look at trial dates, and start to look at pretrial motions and things like that, I would imagine.
Hmm. You posted something pretty recently to your social media that I really appreciated, and it was talking about your case, but also talking about how around the world, so many people are facing really draconian sentences. And so, animal rising activists, people from Stop Oil are being arrested and thrown in prison. Paul Watson, from the Paul Watson Foundation, founder of Sea Shepherd, is also sitting in jail right now as we speak. And um, it seems like, sometimes I think that the responses are so extreme because they're desperate or something. Like do you feel that too? Do you feel like do you feel like this is a unique moment for one, or do you think like we're at some sort of inflection point for the movement? And do you think it bodes well, or do you think I mean, I'm sure well, I'll let you answer instead of putting words in your mouth, but what do you think about this moment in time, I guess?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think obviously a lot of this right now is happening in the UK, which is inspiring to watch and also disturbing. Um, so several Just Stop Oil activists, 5 Just Stop Oil activists, were each sentenced to 4 to 5 years in prison for just literally discussing a nonviolent climate protest on a Zoom call. And in response to their incarceration, Just Stop Oil activists have now been, doing actions across the UK and getting arrested. And now I believe there are 21 Just Stop Oil activists who have been remanded to prison in the last couple weeks.
Right.
So, that's like, while the UK prisons are going through like a prison um, capacity crisis, like the prisons are full. People who've been convicted of sexual assault are receiving deferred sentences, so or suspended sentences. And yeah, so it's just ridiculous. It doesn't
Mhm.
make logical sense, so it's obviously political. Um, and then I don't know, like it's hard to know like that, if anything's tied. Like obviously, Paul Watson was arrested in a different part of the world,
Mhm.
and all of that, but it definitely does seem like in the UK especially, there's a huge crackdown right now on nonviolent activism. Just Stop Oil has been being raided. Animal Rising has faced raids. They currently have 18 activists, each facing up to 10 years in prison for rescuing beagles from an animal testing facility in the UK.
Mhm.
So yeah, I feel like it's really feels like a moment in the UK at the very least, and it feels like a point that's kind of for the animal and environmental groups, maybe especially right now, environmental groups, like how they respond to this moment seems very critical to me. I think
Mhm.
repression has the power to backfire. It has the power to be hugely beneficial to a movement, but it also does have the power to legitimately crush a movement and to destroy it.
Mhm.
And I think how activists are able to respond largely will determine that. And activists are able to continue to take action and continue to withstand incarceration. Um, that's going to be huge. But we'll see. I think it'll be, probably very beneficial to us in the US to kind of see how things play out in the UK. So I think activists here should definitely follow that closely because we can
Mhm.
learn from it. All of these things are learning opportunities for other activists.
Mhm.
And obviously also try to support them however we can from afar, and make sure that their stories are told. I think one of the scariest things is like the possibility of just getting like forgotten in prison and having it all be for nothing. And we should make sure that that's not the case for these activists who are going to be incarcerated for a long time. Um,
Yeah.
and obviously, Paul Watson's situation is very disturbing as well. He's facing life in prison, and might never get to see his son again, and very very heartbreaking situation, and all because he just was going to go intercept some whaling ships. I mean, he was on his way to do that. It was obviously a warrant that had been obtained in advance, but
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, but I think all of these moments, it's just largely how we respond to them, and we need to see
Mhm.
them as not as a sign to back down, not as a sign to be more timid and reserved in our activism, but as a sign to fight harder and to be
Mhm.
louder.
Yeah.
Um, and I think if we can kind of train our movement to have a culture where that is how we respond to repression, then that's a really good start.
Yeah. And that may deter repression in the
Yeah,
future.
that's
I mean, if we
yeah,
make it backfire.
yeah,
Because you mentioned, yeah, I think there have been instances where repression has backfired, instances where repression has succeeded in our
yeah,
movement. And so, yeah, I really like that you made the point that they're trying to silence you. That means you need to be louder.
yeah.
Don't let them silence you or scare you. Yeah, you're a real inspiration, Zoe, for
Thank you.
facing what would be for many people very scary situations and just facing them down. And yeah, it humanizes you to some extent, that I've heard that you do get nervous sometimes as well before you do actions, but you just find the inspiration to push through it. Um, you mentioned Saul Alinsky. I want to start doing this more with my guests, but just asking them what are the things that you read? What are the things that you draw inspiration from?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as far as like social movement strategy, I think Doug McAdam has some really helpful work talking about the importance of nonviolent direct action. His analysis of the American civil rights movement, I think, is
Mm.
something that every activist needs to read. Um, and I think the book Poor People's Movements, Why They Succeed and Why They Fail, um, by Piven and Cloward, two sociologists, is also something that's really important to read. That book kind of analyzes four social movements and tries to nail down the factors of like why they were able to emerge, and why they
Mhm.
ultimately began to decline, and why in some ways they succeeded and why in some ways they didn't. I
Mhm.
think that's really important. I think like more like on a inspirational level, I'm particularly inspired by the women's suffrage movement in the UK, the Women's Social and Political Union, which was founded by Emmeline Pankhurst, has been a very huge source of inspiration for me. I've read Emmeline Pankhurst's autobiography and have done like so many school reports on her and on other activists in that movement. So I definitely draw a lot of inspiration from them, but from other movements in general.
What specifically about the women's suffrage movement in the UK was so inspirational?
I think the resistance that they showed in the face of repression is really inspirational to me. In the women's suffrage movement in the UK, women were being mass incarcerated for women's suffrage activism, for often minor things and sometimes for more serious things. And women in jail, they would hunger strike and starve themselves for many weeks, and it would basically created a situation where the jails in the UK, they didn't want women to die in custody because they were afraid that that would give the movement a martyr, and then these law enforcement agencies would have blood on their hands. So they started to force feed the women with tubes, basically, which like Emmeline Pankhurst describes as like such a painful experience. She says like when they were removing the tube, it felt like they were ripping out the skin on her throat.
Oh my God. It's like foie gras, like oral
Yeah.
lavage thing.
Yeah. So like incredibly disturbing things that these women went through. Like there's one scene in that Emmeline Pankhurst describes in her autobiography that it always sticks with me, where she'd been hunger striking for a long time. She was like incredibly weak, like could barely walk around her jail cell, and they came in to force feed her, and the women would resist force feeding. They would not lie still. They would try to get away, and partly because it was painful, and also because they were trying to hunger strike. And so they came into her cell to take her for force to be force fed, and there was a like 5-gallon jug of water that was in her cell, and she picked it up with like all the strength she had and like swung it over her head and was like, if you like step 1 foot closer to me, like I'll throw this at you. And then they left her cell.
What a badass.
Yeah,
I'm gonna read that now. That sounds good. Well, and directly relevant to what we're discussing too. I'm reading Tom Harris's book right now about the Shat campaign in the UK. It's called Your Neighbor Kills Puppies, and he was describing Barry Horn's hunger strikes that he did in the UK as well. I think he ended up dying from going on hunger strike there. So yeah, but really cool. So Emily Pankhurst is what was that?
Emmeline Pankhurst. She wrote the book Suffragette: My Own Story.
Suffragette,
she's
story.
the founder of the Women's Social and Political Union.
Really cool. Wow. What do you study at UC Berkeley?
Yeah, so I'm designing my own major through the Interdisciplinary Studies Field program at UC Berkeley, which basically like you just select classes and kind of propose your course of study, and then you can name your major, and you also have to do a senior thesis research project. So I just actually got my major approved. It's like you have to apply for it because they want to make sure you're not just kind of cheating the system to try to get out of like other requirements or something. So I got mine approved actually a few months ago. So I'm officially majoring in social movement strategy, which is exciting.
Oh, very cool.
So I've been taking
Social
a lot of
movement strategy
on both kind of like history classes on different social movements and also kind of sociology classes analyzing social movements, which has been very, very interesting.
Well, Berkeley is like, as I'm finding out, is ground zero in so many of these historical moments. So is a UC Berkeley has a lot of these classes related to social movements?
A decent amount. I wish they had more, and honestly, you'd think they would have more, given that it's UC Berkeley. Yeah, I mean, on some level, I've been a little disappointed in UC Berkeley. It feels like it's kind of
Mhm.
gone more in like a corporate direction in recent years, which is,
I
yeah,
see.
just a bummer. Hopefully, it can eventually reconnect with its activism roots. But I mean, it makes sense to some extent. Like the activism at UC Berkeley has kind of always been protesting the institution.
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, it makes sense. But yeah, there are some great classes, and I had an awesome professor last semester who is a part of Occupy Oakland. So, it's also
Mhm.
like a lot of people teaching these classes who've actually done the work and understand things on the ground. I think sometimes it's frustrating when you are like when you're kind of learning from someone who doesn't have the same perspective going into it. But because she kind of came from that perspective, she very much designed the class to be useful for people who are activists,
Mhm.
which is really cool.
Yeah, Berkeley's interesting. Yeah, Paul and Lewis were telling me about that People's Park and how at the time when we were discussing it, they were like it was walled off, and they said,
Yeah,
you can Google map it and just see like
yeah,
they put all these. Yeah,
yeah,
that's an interesting thing. So, yeah, Berkeley's activist past is seems to be often in clash with the authorities of Berkeley. I guess it's not
yes.
dissimilar. It's a microcosm, I guess, of everywhere else, and so yeah, anyway, the so you've talked a bit about some of the stuff that you found that you're passionate about, but what about outside of animal rights or activism or anything like that? When we were in Sonoma County, you had us watch Jury Duty. That was fun. We watched Barbie together. That was a good time. So what are the things that you find joy in outside of this world?
Oh, good question. I'm a huge nerd. I love, like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and stuff like
Nice.
that, like fantasy fiction worlds. I find a lot of joy in that. I don't often have a lot of time to do it, but I do like painting when I can, like on canvas.
Mhm.
I particularly love painting chickens.
Okay.
I'm not a surprising person. Um, just typical, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not great at doing things outside of animal rights in school.
Yeah, you're
To
pretty
be
all
honest.
in.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, those are some things I enjoy. I like, spending time with animals and
Mhm. At
going for
Happy Hen
walks and things like
mhm,
that. Yeah, nothing too crazy.
mhm. Yeah, your time when you spend at Happy Hen must be very therapeutic to be around all these animals, some of which I'm sure you've rescued from horrible situations as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's, nice being able to spend time with them and, some animals I have very, very close relationships with, like Glenn, and,
Mhm.
so I miss those animals in particular quite a lot when I'm not at the sanctuary,
Yeah.
and I worry about them constantly when I'm away, so.
Does Glenn, get excited when he sees you? Does he run up to you?
He gets excited, he definitely, like, follows me around a little bit and, likes to
Yeah,
just kinda sit and hang out, with me, and, yeah, he's such a sweetie, and, he likes to be the center of attention and be wherever everyone is, so, um
nice, yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you again, Zoe, for all the work that you're doing, and you do inspire me and so many others. I know that I've seen that there are people like, well, just like people like Jamie Logan have done activism with you now. People who are like getting more and more prominence in the movement are definitely taking note of all the work that you're doing. So it's just amazing. And of course, like, I love direct action everywhere and everybody over there, but you're just such a big part of that. And
thank
um,
you.
yeah. So I think that those were the questions I had. Is there anything that we didn't cover? I mean, your activism goes way back. I mean, I could go through a lot of different things too. Um, but is there anything you think that we like critically missed?
Well, I don't think so, I think we got the gist of it.
Yeah. Well, I do remember I did see a video recently that I hadn't seen before, and it was a lockdown that you did at a slaughterhouse. I can't remember which one,
Mm,
but it was
yeah,
you and Juliana, I believe. And
yeah,
yeah, that was seemed to like a pretty intense situation. And well, what was that
yeah.
experience like for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't talk about that a huge amount anymore, but that was yeah, that's probably one of my favorite actions I've ever done, actually.
Mm,
I think it was very powerful. Yeah, that was at the Cal Poly slaughterhouse. Cal Poly, like I talked about that a little bit before. It's kind of
mhm,
tied to how we started the sanctuary and rescuing chickens from there. They, as part of their animal science major program, they require every student to take an animal slaughter class.
mhm,
At the slaughterhouse where they observe different animals being slaughtered. So we had begun protesting, and I actually went and did a live stream, and during one of the classes, we had connections with a student who was in the animal science department, so he was kind of telling us all of the like details and like when every class is going to be, and things like that. So we went when they were going to be slaughtering a pig. They had her in like they had like this little holding pen attached to the chute where
mhm,
they bring animals into the slaughterhouse. And so I hopped into the holding pen, and sat with her and live streamed. And I was kind of pleading with the professor and the workers at the slaughterhouse, to let us take her back to Happy Hen Animal Sanctuary. And the police came, and ultimately the police ended up kind of dragging me out of the pen, and I was banned from the Cal Poly campus for 7 days. But
mhm,
about 8 days after that, they were going to have their next slaughter class. So that timing worked out. And I felt like a lot of guilt about having kind of failed to save this pig. We named her Dana. And I don't know, I think I left that situation feeling like I could have done more and I could have tried harder
mhm,
to save her. So we kind of decided that the next time we would escalate, and that I would chain myself to the slaughterhouse so that they couldn't slaughter the animal. So they were going to be slaughtering a cow for the next class, and as they were pulling in with the cow to unload her from the trailer, Julianne, Perry, and I, we chained ourselves to the gate of the chute where they had to bring the cow in to get the cow into the slaughterhouse. We chained ourselves there. And it was like a very, very heavy duty chain, like the most expensive, thickest chain you could buy from Home Depot. And it took them a very long time to be able to cut that chain. So we were there for a couple hours, and they took the cow away. We ended up naming the cow Justice, and
mhm,
they took Justice away. Um, and they canceled that class, and eventually the police were able to get through the chains that Julianne and I were wearing, to get us away. And when they were arresting us, we kind of both went limp, making them kind of like dragging and carry us away from the slaughterhouse. And there's this really powerful moment, when we were starting to be arrested, where Julianne just screamed, like, "Where is justice?" And that kind of became the rallying cry for the entire movement to shut down the slaughterhouse at Cal Poly. And um, there were all these Cal Poly students who'd gathered around to watch the whole thing, as we were being arrested. And then I think probably the most effective thing that came out of that entire thing was the slaughterhouse had kind of been a secret on the campus. Like, it was there, but no one talked about it.
mhm,
It was called a meat. It's called a meat processing center, and they don't really want people to think about what's happening there who are not in the ag department or in the animal science department. So, like, before we did that action, like, you would go around the Cal Poly campus, and if you like brought up a slaughterhouse to a student, they'd be like, "What are you talking about? What slaughterhouse?" Like there's like people didn't know that there was a slaughterhouse on their own campus. And pretty much it felt like overnight it went from hardly anyone on campus knowing about this slaughterhouse to like the entire campus knew that there was a slaughterhouse there.
Mm,
And a lot of people were very disturbed by that. Um, and yeah, they, in response, we unfortunately never succeeded in shutting down that slaughterhouse, but um, they did like build it. There's to this day, it still stands like this huge fence, like very, very tall fence with all the security around the slaughterhouse now. And all of
mm,
the ag units have security now that they didn't have before. So they're definitely afraid of people
mm. So
challenging
you,
that.
yeah, you did. So they were forced to spend quite a bit of money, I guess,
Yeah.
erecting these walls. And yeah, and you exposed them to the students who didn't know. So yeah, so I wouldn't say that was a loss. It seems like a
Yeah.
win. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
what so was since the rallying cry came to be, where is justice? What ended up happening with justice?
Yeah, so we honestly don't know.
Hmm.
We tried in the days after we were released from jail, tried to find out what happened to her and tried to reach the university in various ways. And yeah, they never told us and never agreed to release her. I would assume she was ultimately killed, sadly. Yeah,
Well,
was not.
shame on Cal Poly.
Yeah,
That's horrific, and so such a stupid use of school resources, and
yeah,
such a horrible thing to teach young people. Well,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, just horrible. Well, Zoe, thank you again for all your activism. I'm going to put a link down below to the convergence so people can sign up to help out in Sonoma County. And I hope that people will follow along with your trial and offer support and help to amplify the message, because as you mentioned, that's part of the goal of these trials, is to make sure that the story gets out. And unfortunately, we don't have a very responsible media. So we have some media that covers these trials, but it's not as much as we'd like. And so we really just need social media support. We need people to share the message. And, one thing that people can do, I think, is to, since you're the social media coordinator at DXC, is just repost those things, share them around to make sure that your friends and family see what's going on to animals and getting the message out. And yeah, there will be a lot happening, unfortunately, with you, Zoe, in the court system, but I know that you're looking forward to it, and I feel optimistic. And I know that they made a mistake arresting you of all people. I think that you are someone who is just, you know, uh, a very sympathetic figure. I think that it's going to be hard for them to paint you as an extremist when people actually get to hear from you. So I'll just say thank you again.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everything that you've done and continue to do for the animal rights movement as well. Yeah, glad to be here, and thank you so much.
Thank you.